It's time for people to see themselves. There's no words to describe how disappointing it is to go into a character creator screen only to be unable to make someone with your skin tone or hair. People just want to see themselves in games.
So if it wasn't clear before, it should be now. All mainstream media has become self-reflective and self-serving. It is all one enormous outbreak of fan service. Everything a reflection of ideologues having their anti-human sentiments thrown back at them in self-gratification. Fans of various franchises have been made to suffer far too long for this, but now even normies are getting caught up in the crossfire. Everything old, which was self-contained, has now been forced to perform within some moronic global homo multiverse where nothing really matters and there is no purpose. Now, if you're out and about the digital world becoming more and more keen as to the state of modern media, the tendency and the goal of modern media is to induce a black-pilled state. It's all about demoralization. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to explain one of the reasons I decided to make this video here is because I had noticed a trend in the type of comments made on my review of Amazon's Fallout show. There's a ton of theories surrounding the nature of these comments, considering their similarities to each other, and why they were all identical with regard to words and phrases they used to detract from criticism. And yes, I'm also aware that Synthetic Man received a similar deluge of comments under his review as well. But then I thought, rather than just speculate as to where all this animosity was coming from and why it seems so fake, I would like to instead theorize on what the goal might be. And I think it is demoralization. Clearly, detractors to criticism of whatever the current popular thing is, no matter what it is, just seem to come and go on an inconsistent basis. This is something I realized after watching Adam Johnson's review on The Suicide Squad back in 2021.
Remember when the first Suicide Squad movie came out and I was like, wow, this sucks, and then a bunch of people were really mad and they were like, no, you cannot say that about my favorite action figure. And now, oh so magically, all of the people who were fanboying over the first film have just disappeared, I guess. I thought you loved that film. Why aren't you defending it anymore? Have you seriously changed your mind about it because it's not cool to like it? Can we all take a moment to recognize just how many people take part in film discourse on the internet who don't actually love anything about filmmaking and are essentially just using films as an excuse to root for their favorite sports team? You people disgust me!
Now, since then, my basic approach to YouTube comments has evolved. I know there's no real way of knowing what is or is not organic anymore, so it's far easier to just write things off and laugh at them. Clearly, my enemies want to give me the impression that the deck is stacked against me. Note, this isn't just for my sake. Others who watch my video or Synthetic Man's video or videos like them might also feel like there's a weight being pressed against us. To that I say, don't fall for it. Enemies who are weak must necessarily give themselves to the impression that they are stronger and bigger than we are. This leads me to talk about this video game, Dustborn. And rightfully so, Dustborn has received a great deal of derision for what it is. The propaganda is on the nose, and in a bout of more white-pilled sentiments, gamers have picked up on the messaging straight away. Demoralization isn't working anymore. Even the usual suspects aren't out and about defending this game, which is kind of weird when you consider the fact that this should be the wet dream of those with a postmodern persuasion. And no, you can't blame this on the game's detractors just having a laugh at the fact that the game didn't sell well. This isn't a case of confirmation bias, because leftists consume product too. What is the excuse? Why wouldn't all the progressives just go out and buy this game, pushing their own ideology back at them? Isn't that the dream? To have a game that reflects you?
I had waited all my life to see players of color, to see a reflection of myself in games.
Where's the support for your dialectical brothers and sisters in this industry?
For those of you who are marginalized, whatever space you occupy in this industry, and I want you to know that I see you and I recognize you and I'm doing the work along with you. And if I can suggest to you one thing, is that you take kind of a moment to think about times when you have felt seen and representative and share them as loudly as you possibly can. Be loud about it. Don't be afraid to ask for more of this and what you've felt and seen already.
In truth, there's not much I feel I could add to the opinions that many others have already appropriately assigned to the heap. Even calling Dustborn a video game would not be appropriate, due to the nature of its content, as the media is clearly just a time sink that has been used to push left-wing propaganda. And hell, I wouldn't even strictly call the propaganda left-wing, unless one wishes to conflate leftist politics with anti-humanism. But the two may go hand in hand at this point in time. In my estimation, looking at things strictly from a political point of view is a distraction. At some point in time, what ought to be acknowledged by everyone throughout the political spectrum is that there are some things which are purely just anti-human. human, and can really now only be judged for how thoroughly artists must hate themselves and their fellow man. Now, why this is of further concern is that this game could easily be brushed aside and forgotten. Lost to the annals of history is yet another piece of go woke, go broke media. Except Dustborn was pushed as a counter-disinformation game while receiving funding from the EU and the US government, which ultimately, dear gamers, means your taxpayer dollars funded this game. And so that means go woke, go broke inevitably involves you and me even as we pay our taxes. Everyone is collectively being told to slide down a sewer. And speaking of sewer sliding, did you know that Dustborn's video game mechanics revealed that the entire goal of canceling people is self-harm? And many of the abilities you will use are, how should I put this, blast from the past? Tactics that were often employed by the social justice types of the last decade or so. I've said this before, but something is in the water. So many lefties nowadays are just going mask off about their intentions. And this is so egregious that even normie crowds are becoming aware of it. And by the way, don't go thinking that all of these abilities that you can use are somehow indicative and therefore relegated to the far left alone. No. I think this game should be taken as a gold standard for self-reporting. I mean, call it what you will. Mask off, they're saying the quiet part aloud. I mean, both the left and the right are pushing extremes on either boundary so far that it's hard to figure out what moderate even looks like anymore. In cases like this, I cannot help but be reminded of what Caesar said.
Each dialectic begins with a proposition, a thesis, which inherently contains or creates its opposite, an antithesis. Thesis and antithesis. The conflict is inevitable, but the resolution of the conflict yields something new, a synthesis, eliminating the flaws in each, leaving behind common elements and ideas.
Yes, I know, Hegelian dialectics, yada yada yada, feels smart. But did you ever stop and think that maybe this wasn't the case of dialectics here? Caesar was talking about tribal conflicts and the human propensity to become even more grounded in a particular set of beliefs regardless of one's individuality. You know, if there's one aspect George Orwell missed the opportunity to talk about in his 1984, it was the idea of a 1984 type sentiment already rife within its own dystopian hellscape.
Is that one of the books we're bringing?
Not that exact one, but plenty like it. We put them in neutral jackets. Helps pass cursory inspections.
What's that one?
Orwell's 1984. A bit on the nose, I know. But game knows game.
In Dustborn, the very inclusion of a scene with a character making mention of 1984 only goes to show how deep-seated the doublethink has become. That doublethink in and of itself has achieved this inverted situation in the minds of today's liberal elites. Folks who would unironically receive government funding for a project that would otherwise promote itself sincerely as anti-authoritarian. But as we know, our liberal elites are the true authoritarians, subjecting us to this propaganda, but they've set hurdles for themselves which are proving impossible to circumnavigate. I covered this somewhat in my take on Sweet Baby Inc. Recall that Kim Belair specifically called for the de-tokenization of marginalized groups of people through art, through media.
We have the power to go like, oh, we can build choices that consider, marginalized identities and just write them into our work. We can decide to tell stories that present very rare narratives and representative experiences. And we can kind of work on detokenizing our minority characters.
But what that has inevitably led to is this kind of Schrodinger's token minority.
Because tokenization is basically the same as this forced inclusion. But really, what Kim means here is she wants people to ignore the elephant in the room. So, simultaneously seeing Black Girl Angerboda is supposed to fill you with joy, but at the same time, you're supposed to regard her as completely natural, and not at all someone who isn't supposed to exist within a Norse mythology setting.
And ultimately, this was the problem that a lot of people were seeing with regard to Sweet Baby's silly story inoculations. Simultaneously doing forced representation, but telling you it wasn't forced.
The terminology she uses to mark this dopamine hit is a moment of joy. This is what they're going to fill video games with. Moments of joy. Black Girl Angerboda is just one example, but one could also reference that one side quest about two gay dwarves and their rainbow bonfire. They're outright doing things which are not conducive to organic storytelling. These are literally me things, injected in media for the sake of stoking the endorphins of a niche ideologue. In short, this is pandering. This is fan service. It doesn't do anything for the story. It has nothing to do with the setting. It's just there so that some can see another on his television screen and point at them like Leo DiCaprio and say, "That's me. That's literally me.
You're a reflection of myself. You're a reflection of myself.
And yes, I am fully aware that Sweet Baby Inc. was not involved with Dustborn, but the spirit is rife within the video game industry. Also, has anyone noticed that the main character in Dustborn looks a lot like Kim Belair? Perhaps then it's all further remarking on modern media's propensity to be self-reflective.
You're a reflection of myself. You're a reflection of myself. You're a reflection of myself.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Reflection. Consultants, i.e. marketers, are definitely curating video games to ensure that everything is DEI compliant, just as Larry Fink desires.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted, and that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities, and we're going to have to force change.
Forced representation and inclusion has more or less become a standard discipline. And with that in mind, we consider the characters in Dustborn. These characters are very much caricatures, but there's clearly an attempt to de-caricaturize them. I guess what I'm saying is that this is Kim Belair's attempted de-tokenization, but inverted. Every character in Dustborn is necessarily taking some token attribute that would otherwise set them in contrast with an antithetical normal that cannot be ignored. And why this is anti-human is that originally token characters, even while tokenized, often still served a purpose beyond being token characters. Their tokenization was still a human attribute. Even a stereotype, while still being a stereotype, is still able to convey humanity. In Dustborn, however, the characters talk and act completely as mouthpieces. They don't come across as human at all.
We should treat this whole experience as the ultimate American road trip adventure.
It is pretty epic, crossing an entire continent. If only we weren't being chased by psychos with space guns.
By tomorrow evening, we'll be out of Pacifica. No Puritans in the Republic.
Plenty of Nazis, though.
I'm fine. Probably something I ate.
I was talking about the gaping hole in your arm, but okay, sure, yeah. Happy to hear your bowels are good.
Oh, my bladder is about to explode.
You said I could go first.
What can I say? I'm a magnanimous bitch.
All yours. I'm not your responsibility anymore.
Jesus. I'm just trying to be here for you. I can do that, you know, even if we're not sharing a bed.
What are these supplies?
Books, magazines, political pamphlets, care packages for the libraries. Materials forbidden inside the American Republic. The librarians will be happy to see you. It's lonely, being a safe harbor in a fascist storm.
Now, in case you have not read George Orwell's 1984, you might at least be familiar with the term doublethink. Now, doublethink was a process of indoctrination in which subjects were expected to simultaneously accept 2 conflicting beliefs as truth. In addition, these beliefs would also be at odds with their own memory or sense of reality. Now, keep this in mind because I want to cover some things that Ragnar Tornkiss had to say in response to people on the internet asking questions about his Dreamfall series back in 2015. Our team is predominantly white and male. That is unfortunate. But then, 2 sentences later, as white males, we have absolutely nothing against our own gender or ethnicity. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is a clear-cut case of doublethink. This is self-indoctrination. This is using your own words to lie to yourself. Minor tangent here, note he's already poisoned this dialogue by using the term gender and not sex, which implicitly acknowledges that there are more than 2 genders outside the natural confines of male and female. Be aware when people do this, as if you choose to engage with whatever they have to say next, that you are not also agreeing with the way something was said. But you see, people like Ragnar are so caught up in their tribal rhetoric that they can no longer see the contradictory nature of the very words that they're using. Beyond that, there's a familiar refrain that Ragnar falls back on. diversity is fun, colorful, inspiring. It makes creating worlds and writing stories more interesting. Well, not only does this rhetoric imply there was something wrong with the worlds and stories that Red Thread Games made in the past, but the assertion comes without any reasoning behind it. Why, Ragnar? Why is diversity any of those things? Can you explain why Dreamfall would be any better or worse if April Ryan had been black? Are you able to articulate how Crow's voice would have somehow improved or degraded, depending on that voice being of a black or white person? You see, when people make statements like, diversity is great, or diversity is our strength, they never explain the why of it. It's all presumptive. It all panders to some kind of groupthunk acknowledgement that has seemingly forgotten that belief in anything requires a logos of some kind, an axiom. And if you do not have a reason for why you do what you do, you are, by definition, unreasonable. And then we go even further and we see that Ragnar is talking about having no political agenda. I'm no expert in politics, I'll admit, but if the EU and the USA want to fund your video game specifically as a means of combating, quote, disinformation, then I'd venture to say that sounds exactly like there's a political agenda. All of this stuff is neoliberal. It is state-sponsored wokeness. But Orwell would never have imagined that said dystopian nightmares he talked about would be conducted by people thinking that his book wasn't otherwise meant to be introspective about one's own human condition. 1984 was not a warning about the capacity that other people would have to oppress you, but about your own capacity to oppress others. And who would have ever believed that the efficacy of using lying propaganda was as simple as referring to it as what has got to be the most doublethink phrasing imaginable: anti-disinformation. Tell everyone you're not lying, even as you lie. Now, something else to keep in mind regarding Dustborns being federally funded, beyond instances of our own government regarding us as deplorable, thank you Hillary Clinton, I also recall an instance in July 2017. Something that happened amidst ongoing investigations of Donald Trump's alleged collusions with Russia was this story about text message exchanges between a couple of FBI agents. These were from Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and these text messages contained egregious criticisms of Trump and his supporters. Among other exchanges was this one. Strzok: just went to a Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support. Page: yep, out to lunch with redacted. We both hate everyone and everything. Page: just riffing on the hot mess that is our country. Strzok: yeah, it's really scary down here. Things like this make it clear to me that within the highest echelons of our government, there are officials who absolutely despise the regular, everyday American citizen going about his business. Government officials just sitting back watching us, seething with hatred and disgust at our very existence.
Peter Strzok says, just went to a Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support. Smell is capitalized. Just went to a Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support. My view, you want to know what's really going on here? You want to know why the counterintelligence investigation really happened? You want to know why we're all really sitting here today? That's why, right there, is because an unelected bureaucrat, an unelected official in this government who clearly has open disdain, if not outright hatred, for Trump voters, like the people of my state, for instance. I could smell the Trump support, then tried to overturn the results of a Democratic election. That's what's really gone on here. That's the story. That's why we're here today. I cannot believe that a top official of this government, with the kind of power that these people had, would try to exercise their own prejudices, and that's what this is. It's open, blatant prejudice. Would try to use that in order to overturn a Democratic election. And to my mind, that's the real crisis here. And it is a crisis, because if there's not accountability, if this can go on in the United States of America, well then my goodness gracious, we don't have a democracy anymore.
Yes, this is very interesting to think about with regard to government funding, or your taxpayer dollars, being used to promulgate what, by all outward appearances, is just some silly video game.
It sounds hopeless, doesn't it? But it's not necessarily hopeless. There is one key thing, I think, to remember in the situation we all find ourselves in. And this is apolitical in nature, what I'm telling you here. This isn't a lib thing or a conservative thing. This is a people thing. When systems are put into place to control you, when tyrants, in whatever form they may take, whether that's a oligarchy, a technocracy, a government, whatever it is, when they're on top of you, wielding their power, that power which is derived through your fear. They want you to be complacent, and maybe you're forced to be complacent. Maybe you can't speak and say the things you want to say or do as you please. But the thing to really take away from it, and to remember in that situation, is to fucking laugh at them. They can't stand it. When you laugh at them, when you mock and you ridicule them, you're spitting in their face, you're slighting them in a way that they can't recover from. It's a wound deeper than a dagger. Because it takes away that precious thing that allows them to enforce that power, which is their fear, the fear they implant in you to behave. When you laugh at them, it takes that away from them. And they're left looking like assholes. They can't stand it. Why do you think humor was one of the first things that was attacked on the internet? Well, before politics. Humor was one of the first things they went after. Because they understand its importance and its power. And that if you laugh at them, you're much freer than they imagine you to be.